It's August 14th, Pakistan's Independence Day, and while it's undoubtedly an occasion for vibrant celebration, it also demands an equal measure of reflection. The festivities we witness today are, in truth, the anniversary of a complex chain of historical events that culminated in a separate homeland through a painful and bloody partition. It was an unprecedented tragedy in which hundreds of Muslims lost their lives so that we could stand here as a free nation today. But unfortunately, some would still cast doubts if partition was even necessary. Most people opposing the partition would either base their arguments on the events of 1947 alone or at the earliest 1940, which is kind of a misrepresentation of facts because the case for a separate homeland for the Muslims of the subcontinent did not emerge in a single meeting or a single decade. It was built piece by piece over years by 3 generations of Muslims, each witnessing growing signs of what their status in a united India would truly be if the affluent Hindu majority was in power. Every decade of realization and struggles added something to the dossier of Pakistan, and that's what today's dossier is all about. So let's go back all the way to the uprising of 1857. When the uprising crushed, the British needed someone to blame. Unsurprisingly, they pointed their fingers at the Muslims, whom they closely identified with the deposed Mughal order that the rebels had rallied around. Thomas Metcalfe found that the British treated the Muslim gentry post-1857 as the defeated party of the old regime rather than as subjects to be reconciled. By 1871, a British official, W. Hunter, was writing an entire government commissioned book, The Indian Mussalmans, around the question of whether Muslims were bound in conscience to rebel against the crown. The result was the widespread exclusion of Muslims from the new administrative services, English medium institutions, and the very professions that would define the levers of power in colonial India for the next century. And then one man's response to that exclusion shaped everything after. Sir Syed Ahmed Khan wrote Asbab-e-Bagawat-e-Hind, The Causes of the Indian Revolt, in 1858, arguing directly against the British reading that Muslims had been the engine of the uprising in 1857. He reached a strategic conclusion. Rather than resisting, Muslims needed to embrace education and reconcile with British power to actually survive in India. In 1875, he founded the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College at Aligarh, which was modeled on the Cambridge education system, teaching English and modern sciences alongside Islamic learning. It became Aligarh Muslim University in 1920. David Lelywell's study of its first graduating generations shows how Aligarh produced not just professionals, but a self-conscious Muslim political class, the men who would later staff every side of this argument. But that generation did not immediately arrive at the idea of Pakistan. In fact, some of the most prominent men who eventually led the movement for independence started from almost a completely opposite position. They actually believed that Muslims could still build their identity from a united India. In 1904, Muhammad Iqbal wrote Taranah-e-Hindi, which is the poem that every child in this subcontinent still knows. Sare Jahan Se Acha Hindustan Hamara, which is a patriotic anthem for an undivided India, written by the man later called the ideological father of Pakistan. So it's worth understanding how he got there. Then Muhammad Ali Jinnah's trajectory is also the same. Gopal Krishna Gokhale, the Congress moderate, famously described Jinnah as the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity, and Jinnah definitely earned that title as well. He was a Congress member and he brokered the 1916 Lucknow Pact, in which Congress and the Muslim League jointly demanded self-government in India. Now, both of these men committed to the united India path in earnest and for a long time before the idea of Pakistan came into being. So what changed? In 1923, V.D. Savarkar published Essentials of Hindutva, arguing that true Indian nationhood belonged to those for whom India was both fatherland and holy land, a definition that structurally placed Muslims and Christians outside the nation. 2 years later, in 1925, K.B. Hedgewar founded the RSS to organize the idea into a movement. Christoph Jaffrelow's History of Hindu Nationalism actually traces how both ideas fed the concept of Akhand Bharat, an undivided and specifically Hindu India. At the same time, something more sinister had been at play. The Arya Samaj's Shuddhi movement, as in purification of India, which consisted of organized campaigns to convert Muslims to Hinduism, paired with Sangathan, a parallel drive to consolidate Hindu communities. Jean Thursby's monograph documents exactly how the Shuddhi campaigns in the 1920s, particularly in the United Provinces and Punjab, became a direct driver of communal conflict in India. And then on top of this, Congress permitted dual membership with the Hindu Mahasabha until it finally barred the practice in the late 1930s, which meant that for years, men could sit in the Congress leadership and in the Hindu nationalist movement simultaneously, which really underscores the secular concept of India. Against this backdrop, the All India Muslim League was founded in Dhaka in December 1906. Now, if you read its founding aims, what's striking is how modest they are. Protect the political rights of Indian Muslims, maintain loyal relations with the British government, and prevent hostility between communities. There is no demand for a separate state, and there is no two-nation theory or a map yet. Francis Robinson's study of Muslim politics in this period argues that the League's early character was actually defensive, a lobby for representation formed within the colonial constitutional framework rather than against it. And then for the next 24 years, that's what it stayed. In fact, the First World War produced the closest thing to a genuine Hindu-Muslim political fusion the subcontinent had ever seen. After the Ottoman defeat, Indian Muslims mobilized to defend the caliphate, and Gandhi tied the Khilafat movement directly to his non-cooperation campaign, producing a joint mass movement against colonial rule. Historical accounts of the movement shows how completely, for a few years, Muslim religious mobilization and Indian nationalism ran on the same track. But then Turkey abolished the caliphate itself in 1924, and the movement's object disappeared. And the alliance built on it also collapsed into precisely what the Shuddhi and Sangathan decade I had described sought to achieve. Communal rioting rose sharply through the mid-1920s. Then came the moment that the whole argument had been building towards, and it arrived not as a riot but as a document. In 1927, the British appointed the Simon Commission to review India's constitution. It contained no Indian members at all. The boycott was nationwide, and the British response was a challenge. If Indians objected, let them write their own constitution and produce an agreed draft. So the Indians tried. Motilal Nehru chaired the committee, and in August 1928, it published what became known as the Nehru Report. And in it, one by one, the safeguards Muslims had been promised at Lucknow 12 years earlier suddenly disappeared. Separate electorates rejected in favor of joint electorates. The guaranteed one-third Muslim share of seats in the central legislature also rejected. Commitments on the northwest frontier province and Balochistan rejected as well. Basically, this was the first time Indians had been asked to design their own constitutional future, with the British standing aside, and the protections for Muslims vanished on the first attempt itself. So Jinnah's answer to this was his 14 points, the minimum constitutional guarantees for Muslims. His amendments were voted down, and Jinnah's biographers treat that meeting as the parting of the ways. He left for London afterwards and withdrew from Indian politics for years. His 14 points demanded a federal India with strong provincial autonomy, guaranteed Muslim representation, retention of separate electorates, protection for Muslim majorities in Punjab, Bengal, and the NWFP, and a communal veto over legislation harmful to any community. They also sought Sindh's separation from Bombay, reforms for the NWFP and Balochistan, religious liberty, and constitutional protection for Muslim culture, language, and personal law. At this point, he was asking for these safeguards inside an undivided India, something that had now started to seem like a distant reality. Now, it was in that moment in December 1930 that Iqbal delivered his presidential address to the Muslim League at Allahabad, proposing that Punjab, the northwest frontier province, Sindh, and Balochistan be amalgamated into a single consolidated Muslim state. This is the moment that the accumulated dossier I spoke about earlier acquires a shape. For the first time ever, the answer to what would actually secure Muslim community had a geography attached to it. And then something happened that most timelines of Pakistan skip entirely. In the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir under Dogra rule, a series of incidents in the spring of 1931 took place, including a police officer's interruption of an Eid khutbah at Jammu and the alleged desecration of the Quran by Dogra troops, which triggered mass protests across the state. A young man named Abdul Qadir was arrested for a speech at Srinagar's Khankai Maula in which he called on Kashmiris to rise against the Maharaja. His trial was moved inside Srinagar Central Jail, and on 13th July 1931, thousands gathered outside. When the time for Zohar came, a man rose to give the azan and he was shot. Another took his place, he was also shot. 22 Kashmiris were killed before the whole massacre ended. It is still commemorated as Martyrs' Day in Kashmir, and the date that followed matters more than almost anyone realizes. The All India Kashmir Committee, of which Iqbal was a member and later president as well, declared 14th August 1931 to be observed as Kashmir Day across India. Iqbal presided over the Lahore gathering himself at Mochi Darwaza. So 16 years before it became Pakistan's Independence Day, the 14th of August was already a day of mourning and mobilization for Kashmir. Then in January 1933, a Cambridge student named Chaudhry Rehmat Ali circulated a pamphlet titled Now or Never and coined the name Pakistan, assembled from Punjab, Afghania, Kashmir, Sindh and Balochistan. The same year Rehmat Ali was printing his pamphlet, Liaquat Ali Khan and his wife Rana went to see Jinnah at his house in Hampstead and asked him to come back to India. By his own account, he told Liaquat to go home and take the temperature of the Muslim opinion and report honestly whether he was actually wanted. Liaquat came back and said he was. The timing was not sentimental. The Government of India Act was moving through the parliament, in which provincial power was about to be handed to whoever could win elections, and Muslim politics had no figure of national stature to contest them. Jinnah returned to India in 1934, took the presidency of the Muslim League, and won a seat in the Central Legislative Assembly that same year. And then in 1937, for the first time, Indians actually governed and exposed the anti-Muslim agenda. The Government of India Act of 1935 handed real power to elected provincial governments. Congress won 8 of 11 provinces in 1937, which included provinces with substantial Muslim populations. For 2 years, from 1937 to 1939, Muslims got to see what majority rule in an independent India would look like in practice, and it wasn't good. The Muslim League's own investigative body, the Pirpur Committee, documented what it found in 1938. First, the Varda scheme, Congress's national education plan, and the related Vidya Mandir scheme in the central provinces, which the League leaders argued embedded Hindu cultural and religious content into ostensibly secular state schooling while sidelining Urdu medium and the Muslim religious education. Then the Bande Mataram was adopted as a quasi-official national anthem in Congress-run assemblies and public functions over sustained Muslim objections to imagery many read as Hindu religious invocation. Urdu was downgraded relative to Hindi in official use and education policy as well across several Congress provinces. Exclusion from ministries and patronage, even where Muslims had been elected, was also happening, which was all part of a pattern of Congress provincial governments failing to police local communal tension. Congress disputed these findings at the time, and historians still argue over their scale and intent, but there was one Congress initiative nobody disputes because it was public policy. The Muslim Mass Contact Campaign, launched in 1937 to organize Muslim support directly and bypass the Muslim League entirely. It was an explicit effort to strip the League of its claim to speak for Indian Muslims at all. One biographer described the effect of these 2 years on Jinnah as tremendous, almost traumatic one. He stopped calling Congress rule majority governance and began calling it tyrannical majority rule. And so all of this built up to 23rd March 1940, where the Lahore Resolution was finally moved, not by Jinnah, but by A.K. Fazlul Haq, the Premier of Bengal. That's right, the demand that produced Pakistan was founded in Dhaka in 1906 and moved by a Bengali in Lahore in 1940. Bengali support for the Muslim League ran on something Punjab's did not: a peasant majority's grievance against a landlord class that was largely Hindu, which Tajul Islam Hashmi's work traces in detail. Pakistan was not only a demand about religion. In Bengal, it was also a demand about land, debt, and rent. It called for Muslim majority regions in India's northwest and northeast to be constituted as independent states. Because by 1940, every entry in that dossier for Pakistan pointed in the same direction: exclusion of Muslims in every aspect. Then the British proposed the Cabinet Mission Plan, which was a proposal for a weak centre with strong Muslim majority provincial groupings, which was the last structure under which both parties might have coexisted. But it collapsed within months. Jinnah, judging that the constitutional route for Muslim inclusion was exhausted, called for Direct Action Day on 16th August 1946. In Calcutta, it became 4 days of killings with organized violence from both communities and estimates running from 4 to 10,000 dead. And then the British exit made it worse in ways that were entirely avoidable. Mountbatten moved independence forward by roughly 10 months. Cyril Ratcliffe, who had never set foot in India, was given 5 weeks to draw the border through Punjab and Bengal. The line was not announced until 2 days after independence, meaning for 48 hours, millions of people did not know which country they were standing in. Yasmin Khan documents how that compressed timeline met a near total absence of security planning for what became the largest migration in human history. Some 15 million people moving, with death tolls estimated between several 100,000 and 2 million. Now, everything until now has been committees, resolution, ministries, inquiry reports, which doesn't really tell you what all of this meant for an average human being. The anthropologist Veena Das spent years studying partition not as an event that ended, but as something that folded itself into ordinary life afterwards, into how people spoke, married, mourned, and stayed silent for decades. One thread she follows is the women who ended up on the wrong side of the new border, whose forcible recovery both new states pursued as a matter of national honor, and many of whom never spoke of what had happened to them at all. And Anam Zakaria spent years interviewing partition generation Pakistanis directly in Punjabi villages and refugee neighborhoods. What comes through that testimony consistently isn't the two-nation theory or the Peepur committee. It's the specifics: which neighbor helped you leave and which one didn't, what you were able to carry, who you never heard from again. And that migration is itself the argument for Pakistan. In the autumn of 1947, with no protection, no plan, no functioning state on either side of the line, millions of Muslims walked toward a country that had existed for a matter of weeks. Nobody compelled them. There was no authority capable of compelling them. They went because staying had stopped being survivable. They buried who they had to bury, and they built the country anyway, with the refugee who became a school teacher in Karachi, the family that started again in Lahore with what fitted in a trunk. And nobody thought all of this was a mistake. Ask them today and most will tell you both things at once: that it cost more than anyone should be asked to pay, and that they would probably do it again. So was partition a rash decision taken by elites? 83 years separate the blame assigned after 1857 from the resolution passed at Lahore. But the demand itself was not an impulse. It was a conclusion reached slowly by people who had spent 83 years gathering the evidence and also suffering through it, and who finally acted on what that evidence told them. Happy Independence Day, Pakistan.